Snow fell in thick, silent sheets across the Montana plains, swallowing the world in a white stillness that seemed almost sacred. And for a long time the only sound was the groan of wooden wagon, wheels dragging through the frozen ground, as the girl stumbled forward, clutching her thin shawl around her shoulders as if it could fight the cold that gnawed through her bones. Her name was Ilara, though she'd stopped saying it out loud anymore, and every step she took felt like it dragged pieces of her past behind her, pieces she wished she could bury forever. The wind bit at her bare feet, turning her toes a bruised shade of blue, but she didn't stop. She couldn't, not when she had nowhere else left to go. The last farmhouse she'd begged at had slammed the door in her face. The town she'd tried to cook for had stolen her food and shoved her into the snow. All she had left now was a half-frozen loaf of bread in her pocket and the faint memory of a warm kitchen from a life that wasn't hers anymore. She walked until her legs wobbled and her breath came out in ragged gasps that hurt her throat. But just when she thought she would collapse and let the snow bury her, she saw smoke rising in the distance. A ranch, a large one, and with the last strength in her trembling body, she forced her feet toward it, praying, actually praying that whoever lived there would let her stand by the fire just long enough for the shaking to stop. The ranch looked like something carved straight out of the wilderness. Tall wooden beams, a long porch glowing with lantern light, horses stamping frost off their hooves, a massive barn built to withstand storms that would swallow a weaker home whole, and the distant howl of wolves prowling in search of weaker prey. Ilara swallowed hard. A place this big didn't belong to a gentleman. Ranchers this far out usually had a temperament as cold as the land they worked, and she'd already met enough cruel men for a lifetime. Still, she stepped onto the porch, her legs nearly buckling, and raised her trembling hand to knock, only to freeze as the door swung open. Standing there was the largest, coldest-looking man she had ever seen in her life. Broad shoulders that filled the doorway, a heavy coat dusted with snow, a thick beard, and eyes like winter itself, pale, sharp, unreadable. He didn't look surprised to find her there, just annoyed, as if she were a stray coyote sniffing near his herd. "You're on my porch," he said, voice low and cutting, and Ilara's heart stuttered. He didn't ask who she was. He didn't ask if she needed help. He just looked at her as if her presence were an inconvenience he didn't have time for. She swallowed, tried to speak, but her lips were numb, so when she finally got the words out, they came as nothing but a hoarse whisper. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to bother you." The rancher's jaw flexed as he took in her bare feet, ragged dress, bruised arms, and the snow melting in her hair. "Storm's about to get worse," he said flatly. "If you're looking for somewhere to beg, the road leads back to town." He moved to close the door. Something broke in her then, something small but desperate, and she stepped forward just enough for the lantern light to catch her face. "Please," she breathed, and her voice cracked so sharply she winced. "I'm not worth much, but I can cook." The rancher froze. It was the first time since opening the door that something flickered in his eyes, something quick and guarded like a memory he didn't want touched. She didn't understand it, didn't know what he saw in her words, but after a long, heavy moment, he stepped aside. "Inside," he muttered. "You'll freeze out here." She nearly collapsed right there, the relief so powerful it dizzied her, and she stepped inside the warm cabin, letting the smell of burning wood and cooked meat wrap around her like a blanket. The rancher didn't look at her again, didn't ask who she was or why she was there. Instead, he walked to the stove, stirred something in a pot and said, "Sit before you fall." She did, sinking into a wooden chair, soaking in the heat like a starving creature. He glanced at her only once, but in that single look she understood why the townspeople called him the coldest rancher in the county. His eyes held no softness, no kindness, just the sharp, distant emptiness of a man who had built walls so high even the sun couldn't melt them. He set a bowl of stew in front of her, and she stared at it as if it were gold. For a moment she hesitated, because nothing in her life had ever been free but hunger won, and she dug in, barely remembering to breathe between bites. The rancher watched her with that same expressionless face. "How long since you last ate?" he asked. She didn't know how to answer that. Days blurred together when you were running from a past that wouldn't stay buried. "Enough days," she whispered. He nodded once, as if that confirmed something he had already guessed. When she finished, he slid the bowl away and leaned against the table, arms crossed. "You said you can cook?" She straightened. "Yes, sir." "Who taught you?" Her throat tightened. "A woman I lived with once." She didn't mention that the woman had been the only good memory of her childhood, or that she'd died protecting Elara from a man who'd later sold her for a bottle of whiskey. The rancher's gaze lingered on her a beat too long, as if he sensed the darkness behind her words. "This ranch doesn't take in strays," he said finally. "If you stay, you work." She nodded quickly. "I will, I promise. Then we'll see in the morning whether your cooking's worth a roof." He pushed away from the table and walked past her, grabbing his coat. "Where are you going?" she asked softly. "Barn," he said. "Storm's hitting hard tonight." He paused at the door. "Don't steal anything, and don't go near the east room." Then he left, stepping back into the snow. Elara sat alone in the warm cabin, her heart pounding, not with fear this time, but with a strange, unfamiliar feeling. Safety. It had been so long since she felt safe that she didn't recognize it at first. She stood, walked around the room, touching nothing but soaking in everything. The cabin was rugged, built by calloused hands, with thick beams, heavy furniture, and worn leather chairs. On the mantel sat a small wooden horse, carved with exquisite detail, something delicate in a world built for survival. A whisper of a smile touched her lips. Whoever the rancher was beneath his cold exterior, he had once been someone who carved toys, someone who cared. She wondered what had frozen him so deeply that no warmth could thaw him now. When the storm began howling outside, she lay by the fire instead of the bed he hadn't offered, curling up with a blanket she found folded on a chair. She told herself she'd sleep lightly, that she'd stay half awake in case he came back angry, but exhaustion dragged her down fast. She didn't know how long she slept before the sharp slam of the cabin door jolted her awake. The rancher stomped inside, snow clinging to his hair and coat, his shoulders tight with tension. His pale eyes flicked to her sleeping on the floor, but he said nothing. Instead, he removed his coat and stood by the fire, warming his hands in silence. Something about the way he stood, rigid, exhausted, weighed down, pulled at her. She sat up slowly. "Is everything all right?" she whispered. He didn't look at her. "Lost a calf." His voice was rough, tired. "Damn storm scared the herd." She hesitated, unsure if she should speak. "I'm sorry." He didn't answer. But after a long moment, he finally said, "You should sleep in the spare room. Floor's too cold." The unexpected softness in his tone startled her more than the storm outside. She stood, clutching the blanket. "Thank you." Their eyes met briefly, his cold, hers unsure, and she felt something warm spark in the air between them. Something that made her breath hitch, but it vanished just as quickly as it came, and he turned away, stepping into his own room without another word. Elara lay in the spare bed that night, staring at the ceiling as the storm raged on, and for the first time in a long time, she let herself hope. Not for love, not for safety, just for a chance to prove she was more than what the world had made her. A chance to cook, to work, to exist without being someone's possession or burden. The rancher had taken her in, but she knew she was walking on thin ice. One mistake, one wrong move, and he could toss her out into the snow again. But she also sensed that beneath his coldness, there was a man who had been broken by something he didn't speak of. Maybe if she stayed long enough, she'd learn why. Maybe he'd learn that kindness didn't make a man weak. As sleep finally pulled her under, she whispered to the quiet room, "I won't waste this chance." And somewhere in the cabin, she swore she heard the rancher shift in his bed, awake, listening, but pretending not to be. Morning came slowly, creeping across the Montana plains in pale gold streaks that seeped through the frost-covered cabin windows, and Elara woke before the sun fully rose. her breath forming faint clouds in the cool air as she slipped from the spare bed and wrapped the thin blanket around her shoulders. For a moment she simply stood there, grounding herself, reminding herself that she was safe for now and that she had promised the cold rancher she would prove her worth. And she meant to. She padded quietly toward the kitchen, her bare feet touching the wood floor with such soft caution you'd think she feared, waking the house itself. The rancher she still didn't, though his name had left things in order the night before, but she could tell it had been months since anyone had cooked a proper meal here. Dust clung to jars, pans rested crooked, the stove door squeaked when she opened it. She took a breath and began working, letting her hands remember movements they hadn't forgotten despite the months of running, kneading dough, chopping vegetables with careful precision, boiling water with herbs, mixing, stirring, building flavor the way the woman who once raised her had taught, with patience, intention, and quiet love. By the time the sun fully rose, the warm aroma of fresh bread, skillet eggs, and thick stew filled the cabin like a gentle embrace. She didn't realize the rancher had come out of his room until she turned and found him standing in the doorway, arms crossed over his chest, hair still mussed from sleep, beard shadowed, eyes wary but undeniably curious. He sniffed the air once, then again, slower, something flickering in his expression. Surprise. "You cooked all that?" he asked, voice rough with morning gravel. "Yes," she whispered, stepping aside so he could see the spread. I hoped it would be enough to show I can work." He walked forward slowly, like a man approaching something he didn't quite trust, and reached for a piece of bread. Steam rose from it as he broke it open, revealing a soft interior that made his eyebrows lift a fraction. He tasted it, just a small bite, but the change was immediate. A soft exhale, almost a sigh, left him, and he closed his eyes for a brief second, as if remembering something long buried. When he opened them, they were softer, not warm, but less frozen. "It's good," he said, and the praise hit her like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. Very good. She felt something swell in her chest, something almost painful, because she was not used to being told she had done well. "Thank you," she breathed. He nodded and sat down, eating quietly but with purpose, and Dilara busied herself cleaning the counter, even though it didn't need it, her fingers trembling with the weight of his approval. When he finally cleared his plate, he leaned back and studied her, eyes steady. "You can stay," he said. "For now." Relief crashed through her so strongly she had to grip the counter to keep her knees from giving out. "I won't disappoint you," she whispered. "We'll see," he muttered, though his voice lacked its usual edge. "And call me Rhett, easier than Sir," she nodded. Rhett, the name fit him, strong, simple, rugged. But just when she felt the morning settle into something calm, a loud, furious banging shook the front door. Rhett stiffened instantly, every muscle in his body tightening as he stood. "Stay here," he ordered, voice cold again. And he strode to the door, pulling it open. A gust of freezing wind burst inside, along with two men, neighbors or ranchers, judging by their hats and worn coats. They looked angry, faces red from the cold, and something more vicious. "We heard you took in a girl," one of them spat. "A stray." Rhett's jaw ticked, his entire body radiating a warning. "And what of it?" "That's dangerous," the other said. "Strays steal. They bring trouble, Rhett, and this one? Folks in town said she's trouble." Dilara felt her stomach drop, her fingers curling instinctively at the edge of the counter. How did trouble follow her even here? Rhett didn't move aside, blocking their view of the kitchen. "You two don't step foot in my home and tell me who I can or can't feed." "We're warning you," the first man hissed. "Girls like her bring bad luck. Heard she left the last place she stayed in ashes." Dilara gasped. "Lies, all lies." But lies could be deadlier than wolves. Rhett's eyes darkened dangerously. "You done?" The men exchanged glances, spat on the porch, and muttered something under their breath before finally storming back into the snow. When Rhett shut the door, the cabin fell into a suffocating silence. He didn't look at her, not at first. He walked to the fire, staring into the flames like they held answers. She stepped forward, hands shaking. "They're lying," she murmured. "I swear I know." Rhett said quietly, cutting her off. She froze. He looked at her, then really looked, and something in his gaze told her he had already read the truth in her eyes long before. The men arrived. Men like them talk because they've got nothing better to do, he added. I judge with my own eyes. The weight in her chest loosened, replaced by something warm and unsteady. Gratitude, deep aching gratitude. Thank you, she whispered. You don't know what that means. Rhett turned back to the fire. Eat something. You'll need it. The storm from the night before still lingered outside, and after the confrontation, the air inside the cabin felt thicker, heavier, but also closer somehow. Ilara spent the afternoon cleaning, organizing, cooking small dishes to store for later, acts of care. She hadn't had the chance to offer anyone in a long time. Rhett spent the afternoon repairing tools, tending to the horses, checking the fences. But she noticed something each time he returned inside. His eyes always drifted to her, as if checking she was still there, as if he expected her to vanish like everything soft in his life had before. As dusk settled, Rhett came in covered in snow again, exhausted but steadier than the night before. She had dinner ready, thick stew, fresh bread, and a pot of tea. He sat down without a word, but halfway through his meal, he stopped eating and cleared his throat. Where were you before this? The question pierced her. She froze, spoon trembling. Do I have to answer? No, he said. But I'm asking. She hesitated, the past clawing at the edges of her throat. But something about Rhett, the steadiness in his voice, the lack of judgment, nudged her to speak. I worked in a small kitchen once, she whispered. A woman there taught me everything. She was kind. She clasped her hands so tightly her knuckles turned white. But she died. And the man she worked for tried to sell me. I ran. The room went still. Rhett's jaw clenched so tightly, a muscle twitched. And the townsfolk? He asked quietly. Why do they hate you? Because I survived, she whispered. And people don't. Like when someone they think is weak refuses to stay. Broken. Rhett stared at her. For a long moment, pain and anger flickering across his usually blank face. But it wasn't directed at her, it was for her. You'll be safe here, he said finally, as long as you keep cooking. And don't give me a reason to doubt you. This place is yours too. The promise was rough, blunt, unpolished, but it was a promise nonetheless. And Ilara felt its weight settle into her bones. She nodded. I won't fail you. That night, when Rhett went out to check the barn before bed, Ilara stepped outside for just a moment to breathe in the cold air. Snow still fell gently, the world strangely peaceful. She wrapped her arms around herself and closed her eyes. For the first time in years, she didn't feel hunted. She didn't feel alone. She felt found. She returned inside just as Rhett came back in, brushing snow off his hat. When he saw her standing by the fire with her hair falling loose around her shoulders, he paused, just for a second, and something unreadable flickered in his stare. You should sleep, he muttered. But his voice didn't carry the same cold edge as before. She nodded and turned toward her room. But before she reached the door, he spoke again. Ilara, she looked back. Yes? Rhett's throat worked, as if he wasn't used to saying what he was about to. You did good today. Heat rushed to her cheeks, and she ducked her head. Thank you. She disappeared into her room, heart pounding, while Rhett stood alone in the warm cabin, staring at the closed door with a conflicted expression, as if he didn't know what she was doing to him, or why he didn't hate it. Later that night, a new storm rolled in, harsher than before. Wind slammed against the window panes, wolves howled somewhere in the dark, and the ranch groaned under the weight of winter. Ilara couldn't sleep. She tossed, turned, then finally slipped from her room to check the fire. Rhett sat there, half asleep in his chair, eyes opening slightly when she approached. Couldn't sleep? He murmured. She shook her head. Storm's loud, he grunted in agreement. For a long moment neither spoke. The fire crackled, warm and comforting. Ilara hesitated, then whispered, Rhett. He looked at her, waiting. Why don't you let people close? His eyes darkened, a shadow passing through them. Because everything I've ever cared about was taken, he said, voice tight. My brother, my father, a woman I once... He stopped himself. It doesn't matter. Getting close is how you lose. She stepped forward, kneeling near the fire. But you let me stay. Rhett didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was barely above a whisper. I don't know why. They stared at each other, the distance between them shrinking, not physically, but in the quiet way two hearts begin to recognize each other. A moment passed, a long, fragile moment. Then Rhett stood abruptly, as if afraid of what might happen if he stayed seated beside her. Get some sleep, he muttered. Big day tomorrow. She nodded and rose to her feet. But before she returned to her room, she glanced back. Good night, Rhett. His shoulders softened just barely. Good night, Elara. And as she closed her door, Elara couldn't stop the small, trembling smile that formed on her lips. The coldest rancher in Montana wasn't as cold as everyone claimed. His walls were high, yes. His heart guarded, yes. But she had seen the flickers of warmth beneath the frost. And maybe, she was the first person in years who made him feel something other than loss. She curled up beneath the blanket, feeling safer than she had in forever. And before sleep finally claimed her, she whispered into the quiet room. For more stories like this, don't forget to subscribe.